it's not just that non-vegans are misunderstanding what veganism is, but also that animal advocates are misrepresenting what veganism is. And I'm particularly thinking about a couple of examples today. So one is here on the screen, is Carnism, which a term that's become very popularized within the movement, and particularly it's used as a slur nowadays as well against non-vegans by vegans, especially vegan activists and advocates. But when you look at even what this is from the carnism.org website, and it says here that they frame Carnism basically as the opposite of veganism, and yet it's then defined as the invisible belief system or ideology that conditions people to eat certain animals, and then goes on to expand on meat-eating cultures. And they even talk about the etymology, I never know which one it is. Etymology, there it is again, that carn is flesh or of the flesh. So although we're framing veganism as the opposite of carnism here, it's actually a complete misrepresentation of what veganism actually is. And then if we use carnism and carnist, we're referring to the food choices of the person alone. And therefore we are, when we use this, reducing veganism to a diet. Similarly, and I'm not here to, just blanket criticize other activist work or anything like that. And, I know people do a lot of good work, even none of us are perfect, blah, blah, blah. However, this came into my awareness, and it just struck me again that this is going to be a popular book. It's in the mainstream now, and yet we're talking about meat eaters. So it's framed as vegan propaganda. So it's aimed, for vegans to argue with meat eaters or whatever. But again, it's kind of making that consistent connection with veganism and eating so-called flesh, or the consumption of our fellow animals. So I guess looking at this, I'm wondering, is this kind of connection doing the movement real harm? Or are these just strategies that will, in a way, bring other people who might not normally be aware of these issues? Will it bring more people into the awareness of these subjects? And is it a strategy that is going to be helpful? Are we, by criticizing this, being too purist, too gatekeepery? Is this more relatable, more recognizable, more accessible for people, basically bringing it to a more mainstream audience? Or do we risk reducing, diluting and moderating veganism and animal rights way too much? This is where I was coming with this little topic. So I'd love to hear people's views in the chat, and of course, Nella and Roger, yours as well.
And you want us to deconstruct all that in 15 minutes?
Yes. Well, probably less now because we've gone over. But also looking at this, I mean, I was saying to Roger just before we came on, if I couldn't have picked a better example of this praise for this book. And it says, I'll read it in case people struggle with the reading on screen, as I do myself sometimes. Thanks, Ed, for how to argue with a meat eater. Life would have been so much easier if I had this book when I stopped eating meat 52 years ago. I would have given away lots of copies to my meat-eating friends. And if you do still eat meat but aren't sure if there's an ethical justification for doing so, you need to read this book. So again, it's really framing it all around flesh, eating flesh. There's not even mention of secretions or anything else. It is literally based around flesh. So, and I'm sure in the book it's not, and I'm sure it expands on many different issues. But I guess it's just that first, in your face kind of marketing, and the praise on the back as well. So I'm just really interested in this. So Jeremy's comment, I was reading that actually. Bridging the gap between the commonly understood and getting others to understand the uncommon is one of our greatest challenges. So very true.
I mean, obviously, the challenging thing from the animal rights point of view that you said in that little spiel was the bit about is this gatekeeping and is it being too purist? Because because it isn't this going to be put people in the right direction and all that, and that's the kind of thing that Singer would say. The problem for me is that this is kind of really part of a more general kind of reducitarian move going on in the movement. And one example is this, which is the first book, same style. So this is Ed Winter's first book. And on the very last page, he says, Donald Watson, who coined the word vegan in 1944, once said, quote, "Veganism gives us the opportunity to say what we stand for in life," unquote. Now, if we know Donald Watson, that was a really massive thing to say for him, because he says things like veganism is the only movement that can save humanity, all kind of things like this. What Ed does with it is he says, so we have the power every day to either stand in favor of needless animal suffering. And he, Ed says quite openly that he's focused veganism as an issue of animal suffering and not animal liberation. And so I think that the movement has kind of fallen in line with all this now. Carnism, reducitarian, the suffering-focused reducitarian. There's a heck of a lot of reducitarians now in the movement, and quite often they're not only not happy with the wider, expansive vision of veganism you would get from the founders of the movement, they actually argue against it a lot. So I just think this is like part of this kind of process. It's linked to this kind of problem that we're almost like we've become the militant RSPCA. That's how I think of the vegan movement now.
I would say I haven't read the book, so but I assume that it says a lot about all kinds of exploitation, because Ed Winters usually does. So I assume his book does too. On the basis that the marketing strategies and all that are planned in order to attract attention. I would not expect something different. I would not expect if the audience, the targeted group is like the larger audience and not only vegans. I would not expect something different, because this is what grabs attention and make a person buy the book and then be exposed to a whole lot of different ideas inside. And although I believe that using suffering may be problematic and at times dangerous, we can use suffering to, as the basis to expose people to ideas, even in the street. People, non-vegans, are more interested in videos, that footage that shows other animals suffering. That's what they makes them stop, and then you have a discussion. And we can say a lot about this kind of footage and if we should use it or not. But my feeling is that non-vegans will stay and talk to you because of suffering. I think it's not problematic to talk about suffering if we frame it the right way. If we explain what do we mean by suffering, that ending suffering is not our end goal, and to use it to expose people to ideas. I find it difficult to stop someone in the street and start a conversation with them. The first, I do not know what's happening today.
That's a jolly little tune, isn't it?
Sorry, I really apologize. Like everything happened.
I want that ringtone.
I'll send it to you.
They say don't work with children and other animals. Actually, don't work with builders and mobile phones. In Nella's case.
Tell them to build a cup of tea and wait for a bit.
Yeah, for our tea break.
My point is that they may have decided to use this for their book cover in order to attract attention. The real issue is how they present veganism within the book, and as with everything, I think that we should, look at the context, how words are used, what other arguments are presented. If someone who uses the word suffering, for example, also talks about exploitation and why it's unfair to exploit non-human individuals and all that. And I think that the first point of contact with non-vegans is food and what they consider food.